Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Carry on.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we can start off talking about. Let's talk about Mike.
Okay. My dad's name was Mike, and he originally started on the BR&P when they lived in Bacchus, and that was in the late 1800s. And they had a forest fire up there, and they had to move everybody out. And they were moved out. You probably you'd heard this story that they moved them out by boxcar, and they could only bring a few things, and that's how my dad came to this house here in Bingham. Uh, and of course, the rest of us were all born there too, but uh, he just lived and ate that BR&P. It was amazing.
Talk about like you can see very. I can talk a little bit while he's doing this.
Okay.
You can tell us about all the kids who work on the BR&P in your family.
Oh, all that worked. Well, there was. I don't think AJ ever did because he went in service. See, that was Spanish American War. But there was Ed, Paul, Johnny, Mike. I don't think Joey may have been water boy, but other than that, no. But the others all worked and retired from the B&O, or BR&P. Finally, the B&O, but BR&P. And then Dad was the foreman from Bingham down as far as Lewis Run, I believe. And then Ed was the foreman from Bingham up to as far as Mount Jewett. And then later years, Johnny, I think Johnny worked on Ed's section, and then he was transferred to Mount Jewett, and he was section foreman up at Mount Jewett. And he too retired from the B&O up at Mount Jewett. The only passenger trains we had at that time were in the morning and evening. Well, we had flyers in the afternoon and late at night also, but the passenger trains were the only way you had of getting to Bradford or anywhere. So the boys, after they were through working, they'd decide they'd want to go to Bradford for a haircut or had a date or some such thing. And at that time, we had pushers that would follow the trains all the way up the hill. And they'd, about a mile out of Bingham here. Then they would unhook and come back down the siding. And the boys would get on the pushers and go to town for the evening. And then when they were ready to come home, the same thing happened. They'd get on a pusher and come home that way too. And then not only that, but at that time we didn't have cars, and when you needed a doctor, the doctor would come from Mount Jewett, and he too would ride the train to come down here. And maybe but the pusher, they couldn't use the pushers at that time because they didn't go to Mount Jewett, but they did ride the trains to come down. But every now and then, if a train would stop in Mount Jewett, they would get a ride because they always had to stop here to set their brakes or something about the brakes. Retainers, yes. And so that way, the doctor would get a ride from Mount Jewett to come down to deliver a baby or whatever, or take care of anyone that needed the care.
That's a good story. That's the stuff that you want.
Mm-hmm.
What else were I thinking about? The great stuff you guys used to do.
So when they rode the pushers, was that something they did quietly, or was that they were?
Oh no, it
so
wasn't.
accustomed to doing
It wasn't so much legal.
It wasn't legal, but they didn't do. Nobody made an issue of it. Nobody made an issue of it.
It was common practice.
Then, of course, with the men being on the pushers and this and that, and then them having to set the retainers and such, we got familiar with all the people that worked on the railroad, And of course, as youngsters, we always were at the depot too.
Right.
And
Well, time out a minute, Angels. Do you want me to go try and stop that pounding? Can you hear that really?
Yeah, I will be able to later.
Okay, let me see. I think it's.
church was in Mount Alton, and no cars at that time. And the priest would come down on the train, and he would stay overnight at Bingham, and then go to Mount Alton and say mass, and then come back, and then take the train again. And of course, we didn't have any transportation at that time.
I think that's a good story. I mean, that's kind of neat stuff. You know, what I was telling Barry is that Jimmy Stewart grew up in Indiana, PA, and he probably rode the BR&P.
Yeah, oh yeah, he probably did.
And Tom Mix grew up in Du Bois.
Du Bois, yes.
So there's probably some few celebrities tied in with the BR&P.
And I don't know. Had you gotten that about me riding to school? Us riding to school on the train?
Did we get that?
Uh,
Or I was up in speeding by then. But if there's anything you want to tell again, if there's anything you say I could have done that better, just stop us and we'll just pick it up from
yeah,
the top.
because we can do things over.
Well,
Anything that you
I think I was kind of talking to him about that while you were out with the
Okay.
pounding. Well, anyway, there were all the youngsters in Bingham and Mount Alton here rode the train to high school. I rode it from 8th grade through junior high, and the people that went to the public school couldn't because of the early hours, but the Catholic school allowed us to come late, and then we stayed after school. And the train was 8:30, and then came home at 5. Then they had a change in schedule, and we didn't get home until 8 at night. And they allowed us to stay at the school until the janitor finished up his work, and then we would go to the depot and wait. But it was a long day.
I can imagine.
But we were fortunate to be able to ride the train.
Talk about Max Moore, because that'd be a
Oh,
good thing.
yes. Well, Max was one of the many, and he was loved by all. And one thing about Max, he wore a red carnation in his lapel, a fresh carnation every day. And he was just the jolliest and the nicest person you'd ever want to know. And we all loved him. And we had him all through high school. And he was great. Should I tell him about my incident of bananas?
Go ahead.
Well, we after school we always did a little shopping, and of course it was a treat to be able to get bananas. They were 3 pounds for a quarter, and of course that's when those trains were not getting up here until 8 o'clock. So the one night apparently I was very hungry, and I ate 2 bananas, and I put the peelings on the floor under the seat. Next day, Max Moore said to me, he said, we do have waste baskets in the bathrooms. That next time, please put your peelings in the... And he knew that it was me. Please put your peelings in the waste basket. But he was...
Yeah. Everybody talks about how wonderful of a guy he was.
He really was.
Yeah.
He really was. Yeah.
Oh, let's see. Who else do you want to talk about? We can talk about...
Well, then another thing about knowing these men so well on the railroad, then years ago, of course, the blackberries were so abundant, and that when you went out, you got them by the water pail. And the brakeman and this one, that one, and the other one all put orders in. And sometimes we had 3 water pails of that's, I'm just saying us, I don't know about the others. We'd have 3 water pails of blackberries for them at their request. And of course we didn't get much for them, but we thought it was great.
See, now you never told me that story.
Oh, didn't I
No,
tell you
I've never
that?
heard that story.
Oh, that was one of the highlights, because we look forward to picking the blackberries and all their orders because they had orders every day. So we did, yeah.
Let's see. What else was I thinking we could talk about? How about? Well, I don't know. You can tell the story. I think maybe Barry'd be interested in this part. There, the people would. How you guys used to get like all your information, your news, and like the baseball scores.
Oh yes. Well, the station was a gathering place for everyone, and especially the boys during baseball season. And they would sit at the station, and that's the way they got all their. That was before we had radios, and they get all their information about the baseball scores from the agent. He'd listen and then he'd repeat it, and it was just like being at the baseball game.
Same thing with mail. You know,
Yeah, you
how
can.
long did it take to get a letter?
Yeah, and
Well, the mail came daily. The mail came daily. I'm not sure about afternoon mail, but we had mail every morning. And I can't say how long it took us to get mail, but it was delivered daily. And we had no complaints about mail at all. And at that time, too, as I said, no cars, and the grocery stores in Mount Alton and Cyclone got all their groceries, and the bread used to come in crates. And as kids, we played with the crates on the on the
platform.
on the platform. Even played hide and seek in. We had a great time with those. And then when I was in 8th grade, where someone called me to see about arithmetic or something, and my sister said, well, she's up at the depot, they're playing tag. 8th grade. And so when I got to the phone, she said, what does your sister mean that you were playing tag? I said, well, we gather up there and we play rail tag. And at 8th grade.
I never heard that story either.
Oh, didn't you?
No.
Oh, yeah. Well, Pat Johnson was one of the nicer families in Brad. They owned the Johnson store. And, of course, she was horrified to think I was playing rail tag.
Let's see. We've done quite a bit. Trying to think. You got a lot of stuff to use right so far, don't you?
If you're stumped, big trips. I mean,
Yeah,
into
you
Buffalo.
took me-
or
Oh,
Pittsburgh,
Buffalo. Oh, yes.
And you know, what were those like? And the meals, eating on the train, they must have been.
Well,
back then.
really, just from here to Buffalo, we really didn't eat on the train. But we made frequent trips to Buffalo, to Springville, because we had relatives in both places. And it was just a pleasure. And I was one of the few in the neighborhood that was able to make trips like that. And then, of course, when I graduated from high school, I was going to go in training, but my dad was retiring at that time, and I had a brother in Sweeney, Texas, and my dad wanted to go to visit my brother. So it was decided that I would go with Dad. So we had a great trip. We had to go by the way of Pittsburgh, St. Louis. I don't remember now. And I
Kansas City. You went through Kansas City, didn't you?
I don't. I remember Oklahoma, but and St. Louis because there was something wrong with my pass, and we had to go across town to another station to straighten that out. That was quite an experience, but we got it straightened out.
That big Union Station in St. Louis is beautiful.
Oh yeah, it really was.
Yeah. Still is if you go. They keep it up.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
And of course, then coming home, of course we slept in the sleepers, of course, and the food was good in the diners too. That was the biggest thrill, was the eating in the diners. But that was the biggest trip that I had ever made. And I never regretted not being able to go in training until a year later. So it was great.
Okay.
And the only other time I was back to Texas then was when my brother died. And then I flew down that time. So that was much later.
Let's talk about Bacchus State, about the flowers.
Actually, before you go there,
Okay.
Cascade Park. Did you ever go to Cascade Park at all in Springville?
Well, no, not Cascade Park, but that was one of the highlights as you were going into Springville. This big gorge there. And you never made a trip but what you weren't right at the edge of at the window looking down to see that gorge. Now, for some reason, see, we didn't have cars then, and you just didn't get around. And the uncle in Springville, he also worked on the B&O, but I didn't know too much about his.
What was his name?
Peter. Yeah, Peter Balon. And his family is pretty well gone. There is one daughter living yet, and she, as a matter of fact, nephew keeps me informed, and a niece, but she isn't able to write now. And she is older than I am, so that's reasonable.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, what I was going to talk to you, whenever we talked about, like, how nice
Bacchus was.
Bacchus and the BR&P in general, because, you know, BR&P was a well-kept railroad.
A well-kept railroad. And one thing I will say, when I'm on other railroads, I can hear my dad saying, rough spot, because these were, and even the dressing, they don't even keep this up as nicely as they kept it up years ago. And
like Bacchus Station.
the Bacchus Station was absolutely beautiful. And the flyers were afternoon, 3 o'clock and midnight. No, 3 o'clock. Oh, there was 3 o'clock, midnight, and one toward morning. But they didn't stop here at Bingham, and if you wanted off, you had to get off at Bacchus, because they wouldn't stop until I got to the top of the hill. And then we'd have to either walk to meet someone there, or years ago it was walking that we did. But that station was absolutely beautiful. Beautiful platform. The platform was all brick, and the shrubbery around was just beautiful. I'm not sure what the shrubs were, but they had a tiny pink flower, and in the spring it was just beautiful. As a matter of fact, up at John Ward's, after the station was torn down, he has some of those shrubs around his house, and I'm sure there are many people that have them after the station was torn down. But it was just a show place up there, and they had a big freight station up there too. And I'm not sure about their freight up there. Maybe their freight up there went into Smethport and probably Ormsby. But I know the store from Mount Alton and Cyclone got their freight here from the depot. And also, people with bigger families, they would get orders from the A&P and have them shipped by train up here. And another interesting thing is about deaths and families. And if you had a death, your people were at home, but they were transported by train to Bradford for the funeral and such. And it's really interesting.
Just wait for him to go by, maybe.
Yeah. You know
Then-
what you could do too?
Is there anything you can elaborate on that?
But
Yeah.
Experiences, people, anything in there about people that
Somebody
have Bradford?
on the train.
well,
Your mom.
my mom, my dad, my brother,
Yeah, Joey.
Joey. Yeah, they were all. Well, anyone in this area, when they died, they were taken by train, And the same way with anyone critically ill. We especially had a girl in Mount Alton that had tuberculosis. And she had to be taken by train, and she was put on a cot, and she was in the baggage car to take her to the hospital. And that is true of anyone. And then there was a family that lived up here in Bingham, and the boy, maybe he was 5 or 6, I'm not sure, but he developed a severe pain and such, and they decided to take him to the hospital, and it turned out to be, when he got to the hospital, it was ruptured appendix. They took him on a freight again into the hospital, but he died. He developed, it was a ruptured appendix when they got him there.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of stories like that.
Oh, yes.
Now, let me see. What else? Oh, you know what I was going to have you do? Talk about some of your favorite stations other than Bingham and Backus.
Well, Bingham and Backus, Pittsburgh, of course, and Salamanca, and Buffalo. Those are the stations that I really enjoyed. Of course, those are the stations I was in most, too. So, and of course, that trip to Texas was outstanding. And then coming home from Texas at that time, we went through Ohio, and they were having floods, and all you saw was the rooftops, some of those houses, and they had to reroute our train to get us back.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Let's see.
Yeah. Oh, and then this.
Yeah, you can talk about that.
If you want to go through all those photos, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, this pump station was up the track here about a half mile, and that was something to see, them putting the water in the engines. It was really quite a thing. And when I was with that Mike Cahill, I was going to show him where that was when we came down the track. Like, I was past the spot before I discovered it. So, let's see.
You know where that is now. It's in front of the Ryan house.
Oh, yeah, the Ryan house, looking at our house.
Right.
And up at the...
And to see the steamer going by behind it.
Yes. Oh, that's another thing about those trains. With the engines, when we were youngsters, you always went to the back porch or the front porch to see the train because the conductors always waved to you. Always. Even the pushers. Even the pushers did that.
Now, do you recognize that picture?
No.
That was during 1943, during the war. That's Ed's gang.
That's Ed's gang working on the railroad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you probably have told him that Grace.
No, I haven't.
Oh, Grace Balon, that was Ed's wife, was one of them that worked on the railroad at that time. I can't think of who else might have been in that.
Oh, let me see. Just think of some names.
And just glancing at these people, I can't think who they might have been.
I think Shelley's mom was out there.
Oh, yes, she was. Marie Clark. Yeah, she was one too. Yeah, but that was quite a thing. That was during the war, when they worked on the railroad. And this picture we have here is, well, what year was that? Now let me think.
It was after.
It was after the other one. See, that would be 1940-41, when the original station burned, and then they took this tool house and brought it up and put it there for the station. Then another interesting thing was, at the time when they put the mail on the trains. That's the way we got our mail, was by train, and it was in big canvas bags, and it was interesting to see the size. We were always amazed at the size of the bags with all the mail in it.
Did they throw newspapers off here? Did you guys get newspapers off here?
Uh,
I didn't know if anybody delivered newspapers up here. Or not.
no, they didn't deliver them, but we did get newspapers.
Yeah, I've heard the guys talk about sometimes the bands would break and the papers would blow down the tracks.
Right.
Racing down the tracks.
Where I live, the New York Central, that railroad china, now it's worth hundreds of dollars.
Then, of course, there is seeing this picture reminds me of the track walkers. And each section had their track walker, and each day his job was to walk the length of the track and back and report any irregularities or broken rails or missing spikes or whatever. And the two that I remember well was like Joe Julius, and he had he had one section, and Carmen DiPietro had the other. And it just seemed impossible to me to think that those men could walk that section of track every day, but they did.
I think it was about 5 miles.
I think at least that, because from here to back, almost to Bacchus, and then down almost to Lewis Run. And then, of course, they had to check on the switch lights also. That was another job that they had to do.
Let's see.
And another thrill is seeing the motor car. Every now and then we'd get a ride on a motor car. It wasn't legal, but we did. And of course, the early motor cars were with the pump handles, but then later they had different ones. But
well, that's what that is. That's a hand car.
yeah, I see that. Yeah.
Oh, let's see. Any other ideas that you might have, Barry, that you can think of?
Well,
if you want to know about the BR&P, Aunt Rose is the one to ask because she.
I maybe a little more on what it was like during the war. You know what
Okay.
friends she had that left or came back, or what it was like when people came back.
World War II. Well,
World
you got to
War-
remember the troop trains and stuff.
Oh yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, I think I had a few pictures of. See, so many of the boys that left from here, though, had to go to Kane. I don't know. Well, we had passengers here, but I don't know. So many of them did go to Kane for some. Now, whether it was the destinations they were going, I'm not sure. But there were quite a few that went from here, and. Well, let's see. I think all of our boys came back, because there was like Donald Beeman, John Beeman, all the Ryan boys, and they all came back. But of course, another thing that took place too is the years ago that the 8th grade class, or was it the senior class? 8th grade class, they always took a trip on the train, and that was always a great day when they all gathered at the depot, and all the parents and everyone came, and the depot was the hubbub of the place, and everybody enjoyed it. Of course, like I say, when we were kids, that's we spent all our time there. Yeah. So.
That's the stuff I think they like to hear. From the non-working point of view, anyways.
Not so much as the depot, but that was a hill, and that was a favorite sliding place in the wintertime for us too. And then when we'd get cold, we'd go into the depot to get warm. Well, of course, during the oil boom here, the thing was that they didn't have electric; they had to use coal. And at one point, this siding was very popular because the coal cars were brought in, and they had to be unloaded into trucks, and the local men did the unloading, and then of course the cars would be taken away. Then in later years, then they made a, what do you call it, a trestle up there where the trucks could drive in under, and they'd load the trucks, and it made it much easier.
Now I would think living next to the track, especially on the hill, you would have had a hard time drying laundry in the backyard.
No,
It
that
was
didn't
black everywhere. No?
that didn't interfere at all. But one thing, right where we lived down there, when those flyers would come through, we'd have company from Buffalo, and they would sleep upstairs. And when those flyers would come through at night, they said they'd come up standing because they thought the train was coming right through the bedroom. It never failed. It never failed that they thought the train was coming right through the bedroom.
It's pretty close, really.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
Okay, I got one.
Okay.
Talk about the hobos.
Oh, the hobos. That was another thing is the peddlers, but the hobos were the thing. Because of the trains stopping up here with their retainers, we had the hobos coming to the door, and they were all very courteous. You had the colored as well as the white, but mostly white. But anyway, they'd come and they'd want something to eat, and if Dad wasn't home, of course she would feed them on the porch. But if Dad was home, he brought them into the house to the table. And they not only eat at your house, but they go to the next neighbor too. They might go to about 3 houses, and maybe some of the sandwiches or such would go into their pockets. But they were all very courteous, I will say that. And then along with the hobos, we had the peddlers. And the peddlers would have packs. And I'm not sure where the one came from, but it was surprising what they carried in their packs. And of course, I know rugs, throws, pillows, and I don't know what all, but there was especially one that would come to our house, and he'd want to kiss me. And I'd run and hide under the bed. And anytime they said, Mr. Nesselson is coming, he's at the door, I'd run and hide, and he'd even come to the bedroom. I was so afraid he was going to kiss me. But that was a popular thing at that time, these peddlers coming from door to door. And not only here, but Mount Jewett and different places too, they stop, but especially here. And everybody kind of enjoyed to see the things that they had. And maybe we didn't buy too much, but nevertheless, they enjoyed it.
Free entertainment.
Yeah,
Anyway.
Now, when you guys ordered furniture, like that now.
Well, I don't.
Yeah, no muffler. I gotta wait for him. Okay.
Maybe that was before I could remember, because by the time I was around, our house was pretty well furnished. But I do remember that they got things from Larkin Company, and it probably came by freight, because Larkin Company was in Buffalo. But you see, me being the youngest of 9, not the youngest, next to the youngest, the house was pretty well furnished.
Yeah, I was thinking, well, like, how about clothes? Did you guys get your clothes?
Oh,
Did you just go shopping for those?
Well, no, you Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery's, and so on and so forth. But you did buy some things, like in Bradford, and of course, that's another thing. We were fortunate with having a pass that I could go most any time. We could go, but other people couldn't go that frequently. So
yeah. That's something you could talk about, is how, like, Bradford. I mean, the railroads are real, and how they made these places.
oh yeah, they did, because of course it was important for the oil company here too, because of the coal, because that's what they run on. And I don't remember, I know they had oil lamps. Oh, what did they call them? Well, it was a lamp that had a wick up out of it that they used for light. So they must have depended on the railroad for the oil too, uh, because at that time the oil business was booming here. So,
Yeah, that was like the major freight business here.
and then of course too, at one time we had a gasoline plant up here, and I'm sure the gasoline was being transported by train too, because that siding was in up here. So I'm sure. See, this is a newer plant that's been up here,
Right.
but the older one was there also.
Right. Yeah, I knew that they had. Well, it's listed in the book that BR&P had a siding in there for them.
For the
Pure Gasoline Company. So
yeah.
it says
Well,
it.
I didn't know the name. I didn't
Yeah.
remember the name of it.
Um,
But I remember one time the tanks caught on fire, and they told us all to get out of the houses. But I remember standing up in the field up there and watching the fire. Hmm.
I know we can talk about extra gang camps and talk
Oh,
about.
extra. Well, the most prominent extra gang plants were down here to the north, just down about a half mile. Would you say?
What did they look like? You know, to
Oh,
describe them.
well, it was a huge, big building. Of course, I can't remember ever seeing the sleeping quarters. All I saw was the big dining room, and it was long tables, and of course, their serving pans. I still have one over home, or not serving pans. They're baking pans, like they bake the things in. Oh, at least 24 inches long, and about 18 inches wide. Someday I'll have it's in terrible condition, but someday I'm going to give it to you so that so that you'll have it. But and then along with that, across the road and on the hill there was a small camp, and I don't know how many men stayed in that at any time, except later years. There was only one man stayed there, and he. After the gangs left, I guess he stayed and worked on the railroad. And he was a man that had a violin. And that he could only play about 6 notes. And at the summertime, every evening he just play that by the hour. Just those 6 notes. But everybody enjoyed hearing him do it. And then of course later years, then when they had to reconstruct the railroad and such, up here to the south, then that was at least a mile, maybe a mile and a half up the tracks. There was another, even a bigger camp than that one, and that was for them to do their summer work then.
And talk about your dad walking up there to make sure they were fed.
Oh yeah, he'd walk up there and make sure that they were feeding them right. Just seems odd that he would take that much interest in it. Yeah, and that was, and then of course, then later times you had your work trains, like you were used to the work trains, and they didn't use those camps then.
Right.
Yeah.
That was neat though, because they had these huge camps out there.
Yeah, it's
100 guys
surprising.
would be working on the tracks, and they'd be camping out right here along the track.
Well, they'd be working so often that in the same,
in the same area.
stop in the same spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
There was always somebody around, probably, because they were always keeping it so tidy.
Yeah.
Oh yes, and
Yeah.
it was tidy.
See, now Grandpa told Dad. Ed told Dad about working extra gangs a little bit down around Limestone, putting masonry in.
Oh yeah.
Putting fences. They put in fences down.
Yeah. And another thing, they kept the berms mowed too. Of course, another great thing for us in the spring, we had the best strawberry patches along the tracks. we would pick strawberries there too.
Yeah, they grow like weeds.
Yeah.
What about Christmas? Did the railroad do much in decorating trains or stations at all? Or
No,
was that,
no.
that wasn't a big deal for them.
No.
But the gardens really were. Like the
Oh, the
grounds.
gardens. They really were. Like that one at Bacchus. I think they had some shrubbery and such at Salamanca. But of course I was around this one more, and it was, and of course with that one up there, they had an agent up there too, and they had daughter about my age and a boy a little older. But I used to go up and stay all night, like a weekend and such up there. So I really enjoyed that up there. That's probably why I was more familiar with that. Well,
Mosquito. I don't know if there's much more to talk about.
well,
You can think. Oh, you know what I was going to ask you? Do you remember the guys like shoveling snow?
That was my.
oh,
One.
oh yes, and they kept. They had the snow plows for the tracks, but yes, they shoveled snow and they kept those siding or those crossings immaculate, and around the depot too. And of course, we played in the old snowmobiles, you know. And out back of the depot, we had slides from the snowplows down toward our house. Yeah, we really did. Yeah, oh yeah. They kept everything neat. And where there was a switch, they had to get in there and clean them out too. Yes.
You know, the big thing too is I always read about it and looking in Ed's books. I have all the time books of my grandfather, and talking there about burning ties. You know, and weeding, pulling weeds,
Weeds. Oh
pulling
yeah.
every
Pulling
weed.
weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They pulled their weeds by hand all the way. You know, track walker, and just like you were talking last night.
Yeah. Yeah. Those track walkers did a great job. And I often wondered about walking those distances. It's just amazing.
Of course, you know, everybody probably walks that distance in their everyday life. We just don't
You're right.
Don't
direct
count
it.
it, right?
Don't
Yeah, I
count
walk
it.
backwards for miles on the lumber piles every day, and I just don't. I have no idea how many thousands of miles I probably walked on lumber.
Yeah.
But those guys, they have a fixed length that you know they're doing.
Right.
Okay, I think that might be about enough you need, or do you got more
Well,
questions?
unless there's more.
And then having to move out the I don't know what other families were there, but I know it was my family that was moved out and down. And someplace I have a copy of that of that forest fire, but I've kind of buried it somewhere, and I don't know where it is. But it's amazing.
I'll tell you where I'd really like to do my dad. It's right on the planet. I think it was 1896. It's around late 1890s.
Well, it was like 1890 because Anne was born in 99, and she was born down here.
Right.
So about 1896.
Okay, whenever you guys are ready.
Okay. My dad lived in Bacchus. Is where he started with the BR&P, and he worked there until there was a forest fire, and they had to move the families out, and they were moved by boxcar, and he was moved to Bingham, and the house that he lived in was about 50 feet from the railroad tracks. And I had 5 brothers.
Well, let's see.
Paul,
Paul,
Ed,
Ed,
John,
Johnny,
Mike,
Mike,
Bernard.
Bernard. Yeah, those 5 were.
Five brothers worked for the BR&P on the section, and then I had a sister that was an operator, and she worked out of.
Well, you just make it a real brief.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't
This
have
is a
because he
real
can
brief-
splice it in.
This
Okay.
is a real brief history of
Okay.
the family.
My dad came here from Buffalo, and went to Bacchus to live, and he worked on the BR&P, and about 1896, and then I'm not sure the number of years, but shortly afterwards there was a forest fire, and they had to move everyone out, and at that point they moved them out by boxcar, and my dad came to Bingham to live, and the house was about 50 feet off from the railroad tracks. And I had 5 brothers that worked on the section at different times, and one sister that was an operator at Freeman which is out of Mount Jewett, and she had to board in Mount Jewett, but had to walk a distance up the track, and carried a pistol with her for safety. And
Was she more afraid of bears, or was she?
I think the wildlife was probably
yeah, wildlife at that point, I think. Yes.
That's something. Do you remember ever seeing the bears out on the tracks?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I
Mm-mm.
didn't know.
Yeah, we got a story today how they hit one and they put it in the locomotive.
Yeah, on the Erie.
Oh, they
hit
did.
a bear one time down around someplace by Corey, PA,
Oh,
and it was dead. They put it in the cab of the engine, put it in the fireman's seat, and brought it all the way to Salamanca
oh
in
no.
the fireman's seat.
Oh, that's something. No, I don't remember seeing. I think we have more bears now than we had when we were kids.
Right.
But although I remember them saying, well, the bears have been in the bushes eating the blackberries, but we never saw one. I've seen more since I've lived over where I live.
Right. The bears are terrible up here now.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get them around here sometimes, but it's been a while.
Lids on your garbage.
Yeah.